Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, about a survivor I wanted to make a video on for literally months now. Yes, I know, a survivor video. I don't actually make many of these, so you know it's going to be special. Today we're talking about Yui Kimura, and why I see her as the perfect survivor. Not my favourite survivor, because Elodie Rokoto easily claims that title. But the archetypically perfect survivor. The gold standard that all other survivors should strive to be. I'll be breaking down Yui's backstory, as well as her fresh Tome story, Crash and Burn, and going over how her character grows and develops in a satisfying and realistic way. But before we dive in, I want you to cast your mind back to the dark times, before Dead by Daylight decided to really develop its storytelling. Survivors and killers alike had tiny stubs of lore, and outside of that, their characters were mostly relegated to their visual design, any flavour text of their teachable perks, and in the case of the killers, their unique power and animations. Survivors especially suffered from this older design philosophy because, in gameplay terms, they are ultimately skins. Each one is entirely interchangeable from the others, so they have pretty much no way to display any personality in the game. But by poring over Behaviour's release history, I think I found the exact point where Behaviour started to care about their stories. And that point is the demise of the Faithful chapter. Both the survivor Jane Romero and the killer Adiris, aka the Plague, have substantially more resources dedicated to building their characters, both in terms of raw word count and accompanying drawings and art pieces. I've talked about the virtues of the Plague's lore and design before, but Jane has never really been so compelling for me. Her story feels like it's told as a series of snapshots that are clearly intended to show her career progression and growth, but that come across as more of a Wikipedia article than a backstory. When the next completely original chapter, Cursed Legacy, brought Yui and her accompanying killer, the Oni, into the game, both of them reflected this new, more comprehensive attitude to DBD storytelling to great success. I've already made a video about why the Oni's lore is the best in Dead by Daylight, but I want to shift focus to Yui, because it's a whole lot rarer to find truly great survivor lore compared to killer lore. Killer stories are generally more likely to be compelling than their survivor counterparts, because killers inherently come with a question. A single word that their story revolves around. Why? Why are they a killer? What happened in their life that turned them into a murderer the entity lets loose on their hapless victims? This enhances the character's direction and personality, as by answering the question, Behaviour's writing team can explore who the killer is, the world they originally belonged to, and how it changed them into what they are today. Until the Great Lore Renaissance, represented by Jane Romero, survivors had never really had a why of their own. They just sort of were. Jane had a why for sure, but her story had its own problems that I think stopped it from being as good as it could have been. But Yui... Yui Kimura cracked the survivor enigma code by not just showing us who she is, but by showing us why she turned out that way, and why we should care about her. Let's start off with Yui's base story that came out when she was released, and how Behaviour managed to give her a brilliant why, while still maintaining the rest of her character, and allowing it to flourish and fit into the world of modern day Japan. Yui Kimura had a fairly uneventful upbringing in Hida, a town in the Gifu prefecture of Japan, at the hands of a traditionalist father who wanted to keep her to typically feminine pursuits. For her part, Yui was having absolutely none of that, and spent her youth racing scooters in Hida's streets, using her late grandfather's old engineering manuals to boost her performance by souping up her bike, as she trounced the neighbourhood boys who couldn't keep up with her modifications. It became clear that she wasn't well suited to a small town apparently known for its production of sake and tradition of local candle making, according to Wikipedia. As she defied her father's wishes time and again to race with the boys, and sought a goal of racing motorcycles for a living, he eventually kicked her out of the house. If she wasn't going to grow up into the daughter he wanted, he would have nothing to do with her. In Japan, forcing your child out of the family home is a much bigger deal than in Western nations. So this represented a monumental rejection that affected Yui emotionally. But she was entirely on her own. Her grandmother, who had been providing the manuals and notes she'd used for her bike mods, gave Yui her savings to help her pursue her new life in the big bad world, as well as a memento from her grandfather, the good luck Hachimaki headband he used to wear. As Yui set out for the bustling city of Nagoya to chase her dream of professional bike racing, we as a reader start to understand who she is, and more importantly, why. Who is Yui Kimura? She's an aspiring racer seeking her fortune in a new city, who keeps going despite the people in her life who try to dictate what she can and can't do. And why does she do this? Because she's a risk taker, confident in her own abilities, who will power through whatever obstacles are placed in front of her to win against the odds. This early character that the start of her bio establishes is maintained throughout the story. Everything she does going forwards fits perfectly with this established character of a confident and daring street racer ready to shatter expectations and glass ceilings to come out on top. And come out on top she did, over and over again. As Yui's victories piled up and she earned a name for herself, her notoriety won her a gang of women bikers following in her footsteps. I've seen a lot of criticism of Yui's story from people who think that it preoccupies itself too much with gender and comes across as preachy. Criticism that I don't think gives the story enough credit. Yui's enemy isn't men inherently, but tradition and those who seek to uphold it. Both her cultural background as she grew up in the quiet traditional Japanese town of Hida, and the sport she dedicated her life to in Nagoya, lend themselves to Yui's opposition being naturally male. So the male-female divide in Yui's story isn't some arbitrary gender war, but a battle of tradition versus freedom, and a conflict in the expectations placed upon the shoulders of women. Yui's first real obstacle in Nagoya came in the form of a stalker. Such an obstacle is important to test the mettle of your character and maintain your reader's investment in them, as well as establish that they are human and their life isn't perfect. The threat being a stalker who invades Yui's home, takes her belongings and rifles through her clothes was a wonderful thematic choice. Much like her father, the stalker doesn't see Yui as a human with independence, but instead as an object for him to exert his will on. Her father treated her like an object by trying to control her life, and refusing to accept her choosing her own path, and her stalker is treating her like an object by ignoring her right to privacy and security, so he can satisfy his sick attraction. And for someone as fiercely independent as Yui, who will not let anyone get in her way, that's something that she cannot abide. So she fights him, and despite breaking several bones, she fends him off. And that catharsis of a hard-fought victory feels earned, and we're fully on board with supporting Yui because she's overcome a threat that was very personal to her. Who is Yui now? She's a survivor of a violent stalker. Why does she survive? Because, just like in her street races, she has a fighting spirit that pushes her to win against the odds, and she'll beat anyone who gets in her way. The rest of her story is a natural progression from that point. She bounces back from her injuries with the help of the women whose loyalty she has earned, Her series of wins builds up along with the size of her following until in the middle of a race she just vanishes. She rides her bike into the fog that manifests on the racetrack and disappears into the entity's world. Yui hadn't had a chance to complete her character arc, and she was whisked away into the realm of the entity. And that set us up to care about her as she fights through the trials, because we want to see how her story ends. This is why I waited for Yui's tome to come out before making this video, because her base story has an intentional lack of closure. Who is Yui Kimura now? She's a hard-bitten survivor, fighting through whatever monsters and madmen lurk in the fog in an attempt to live another day. And why should we care? Because Yui's still in the process of making her dream of being a champion racer come true. And from the character behaviour has shown us, we want her to succeed in that dream. Even before Yui's tome story, Crash and Burn, got leaked, I considered Yui to be the gold standard of survivor lore, but for this exact reason. She feels like a whole person with clear goals we can root for, and he's demonstrated her ability to attain them time and time again. We understand why she is the way that she is, and we know why we should care about her. Every survivor bio before and since can only aspire to be as good as Yui's. Which is why I'm happy to report that Crash and Burn made Yui's story even better. Because Yui's story was kind of already a complete expression of her character, I didn't really know what we should have expected from her tome. She didn't really have any glaring holes in her lore that the tome needed to fill. So this story I thought would just be enriching the character of Yui rather than attempting to complete her. I didn't know what I wanted, and I didn't have any real demands or expectations. So I was content to sideline Yui in favour of waiting far more keenly for the nurse's story in this tome. What a mistake that was. Crash and Burn did so much more than I had expected to enhance Yui's character, and it did so by creating and juxtaposing two parallel narratives that explore her life from multiple different angles. Yui's reality as she makes a name for herself on the mean streets of Nagoya is contrasted with her dark and morbid dreams that allude almost prophetically to her future in the trials, and recontextualise her relationship with her accompanying killer, the Oni. Let's start with the simple stuff, and discuss how it depicts her day-to-day life as a street racer in Nagoya. Crash and Burn concerns itself with the midpoint in Yui's life, after her move to Nagoya, but before her encounters with her stalker. She's starting to make a name for herself on the streets, but the problems established themselves in her main bio persistently follow her. The inclusion of Hiro as a central character in Yui's story, I think, has helped to dissolve the misconception some people had of Yui's story being women good, men bad. They're friends who support each other in their endeavours and have each other's back. Yui isn't resentful of Hiro getting the opportunity to race against the Secret Four, even though she'd been denied the opportunity herself, on the basis of her gender, because she's a good friend to Hiro. Which makes Hiro's accident and Yui's reluctance to break the hard truth about the extent of his injuries to him feel like even more of a punch in the gut. Her friendships with Hiro and Misato feel organic and weave Yui into the world of the Nagoya racing circuit. Hell, it's entirely likely that Misato was part of Yui's Sakura 7 gang mentioned in her original story. Everything in the Nagoya portion of Crash and Burn is a natural progression from Yui's original backstory. Not just the plot, but also the portrayal of Yui's character as a competitive and headstrong young woman. The graphic description of Hiro's accident and the callousness of Shinji inflames Yui's desire to take down the Secret Four title and fuels her characteristic drive to win. If the story had been left here, just before the race we know Yui is going to win, it would have been a satisfactory story, on par with many of the Tome stories released since the archives began. Again, Yui's character didn't need any holes to be patched up, so her story didn't need to do anything too special to be good. All any of us ever really demanded was more of what makes Yui so compelling. But what we got was something far greater, an exploration of Yui's dreams. We are given the privilege of diving into Yui's subconscious mind, and what we see is something very unique. Yui sees what appears to be a premonition of her future as a survivor in the fog. She rides her bike through the fog as a red-eyed demon chases her, an obvious parallel to Kazan Yamaoka, the Oni, who was released with her. The story cleverly messes with us here because it leads us to believe that the demon chasing Yui in her dream is Kazan himself. But in the second dream, it is revealed to both her and the audience that the monster in the dream is actually herself. I'm glad they did this because shoehorning Kazan into Yui's story wouldn't have felt natural, since his story is long and complex enough without tying it to Yui as well. So keeping his presence in the story to merely an allusion to her future in the trials allows her to flourish outside of his shadow. Yui is a good character on her own, she doesn't need Kazan in her story to make it work. Instead, her dreams reflect something much more personal to her than the demonic ancestor of the Yamaoka family. They're a commentary on the character of Yui Kimura, an acknowledgement that she's not perfect and that her story and development aren't over yet. This commentary is made of a series of dream sequences, first of her running from the Oni in her mind, then her meeting the people she could have been in other lives, then finally reflecting on the grandmother who put her money, faith and love into Yui's life way back at home in Hida, where her story began. The demonic version of herself she sees in her dreams isn't a supernatural threat, but a warning that her obsession with winning at all costs could turn her into a monster and become her downfall someday, as she loses her humanity to her desire to be on top. She fears it not because the demon presents a physical danger to her, but because she doesn't understand at first why it takes her form. This happens just after Hiro's accident while he's in the hospital, where Yui's at her rock bottom, and the dread and shame Yui feels at having to tell him he'll never walk again is mirrored by the dread of knowing what awaits her in her dreams, and the shame at Yui herself being the monster she fears so much. The two worlds run parallel to each other like train tracks, as Yui prepares to race the Secret Four. In her last dream, she sees herself as an old woman, looking at her future with young eyes, helpless to watch, as her older self throws herself off a cliff. She struggles to come to terms with the realization that this Yui, and the countless others piled up at the foot of the precipice, could just as easily be her as the red-eyed demon. You might think that the Yui we all know and love would try to fight through this struggle alone. She's a fighter with fire in her blood. She wouldn't let something little like a dream bog her down when there's races to win. But after being at Hiro's bedside as his life crumbled around him, unable to do anything to help, Yui made a different choice. At first, she spoke to Misato to help her understand what she saw, which admittedly I think was more for the reader's benefit than for Yui's. But eventually she takes some time to think back to her childhood in Hida and a talk she once had with her grandmother. This was clearly set up to be a parallel to Yui's encounter with her older self in the dream state. We get to understand how Yui's most defining characteristic, her desire to win, can be her greatest failing as a person. When she was a little girl, Yui had gotten upset at her friend for losing them a relay race, because she stopped to help someone who had fallen over and hurt themselves. The way Yui saw it, sacrificing victory to help someone else wasn't worth it, and anyone who does so to her is weak and doesn't deserve to win. But her grandmother tried to talk her round, and as she goes on, we can rapidly see that for all her camaraderie off the track, Yui's just one race away from becoming someone a whole lot more heartless. There's one section that sums it up better than my words ever could. Empathy is what makes us human, and if you lose this, you are just a very good machine that wins. What does it matter if you gain the world, if you lose your humanity? At that moment, Yui has to take a long, hard look at herself. Just like we did. We read through her backstory and followed her on her adventures in the real world and the dream world. Yui has understood exactly why she is who she is. The race she lost as a child sculpted her into the competitive racer she is today. Defiant to the end and full of contempt for anyone who demands her to slow down. But now she has to think about the other big question. The question that every last piece of her life has pushed her and us towards. Who is Yui Kimura? The answer comes not in the story itself, but in the animation that follows. The race against Shinji. For the entire story, he's proven himself to be entirely contemptible with no redeeming qualities. He's shown to be consistently misogynistic to Yui, and he was willing to use underhanded tactics and psychological warfare to give himself the edge in his races. Tactics that ultimately cost Hiro the use of his legs. He is the very good machine that wins. And in the race, he crashes out. He falls from his bike without a helmet, and Yui has to make a choice, has to decide who she's going to be. Is it worth sacrificing the win to help Shinji? Someone she has every reason to despise? Someone she fantasized about killing after what he did to Hiro? Yes it is. She goes back to drag him out of the wreck of his bike, forfeiting the race winnings. Yui isn't the red-eyed demon striding over the corpses of broken bikers. She's more than that, better than that. Her drive to win is as strong as ever, but she's learned it's not worth losing your humanity to stand on top of others. And her decision is validated by the actual race winner, giving her his winnings, as a show of gratitude for saving Shinji. The same reward she would have gotten if she'd carried on the race and won without him. Even when she's slowing herself down to help others, she's still a winner. That's who Yui Kimura is. Crash and Burn gave us so much more than we could have asked of it. And it did so with a pristine style and flair that shows it was written with love and care for the end product, as a piece of literature. It respects the intelligence of the reader by including lots of details that don't draw attention to themselves and reward you for being alert, such as the foreshadowing of Yui's memory of her grandmother when she meets her older self at what's implied to be the same precipice. Much as we, as readers, have Yui's base story, as well as Crash and Burn, to work off and create our image of who Yui is, Yui herself is presented with a variety of images, experiences and memories to create her own identity and determine who she is. That's what makes this story so enchanting, and why I think Yui is the perfect example of survivor lore. Because everything about her goes above and beyond to create a realistic and detailed character. Sure, we know who she is and why she is that way, but she's far from the only survivor who has these details ironed out. But Yui has stepped beyond that, and has become self-aware, reflecting on who she is and using that to grow as a person as her narrative continues. A character has identity and a backstory, a motive and a reason to keep going. The capacity for self-awareness, reflection and self-improvement is beyond the capacity of a mere character. It's human. Yui Kimura is the closest survivor before or since to feel like a real human who organically grows with all the virtues, vices, flaws and failings that we all exhibit in our day-to-day lives. And adding to that realism that makes Yui so compelling, that trajectory of personal growth isn't done yet. Real people don't just stop changing at an arbitrary, narratively convenient point. They keep on changing as long as life changes around them. Yui's got unfinished business to take care of as she literally faces the demons of her nightmares and fights tooth and claw for survival in the realm of the entity. And her burning desire, her need to win, tempered by her willingness to channel that desire to embolden others too, makes us all want to see her tale to the end. Who is Yui Kimura? It's simple. She's a masterpiece. For everyone who waited so patiently for this video, thank you, and I hope it was worth the wait. If you liked it, then please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to me. You can also join the channel's Discord server and find my Twitter, both linked in the description. And in addition, I am launching a Patreon for anybody who wishes to support the channel any more financially substantial way. Whatever you do, do not feel obliged to join. This is entirely a free will thing based off some requests I've had, but patrons will be getting some spicy rewards that'll be on their way in the near future. In addition to a exclusive role on the Discord server, rewards like access to the collected audio archives that I'm recording of all of Dead by Daylight story content will be available for patrons at any tier. So if you're interested in that sort of stuff or other rewards I might have later down the pipeline, then please do take a look. The link to that is in the description as well. For anyone who wants to support the channel but doesn't want to commit to a regular donation, I've also set up a Ko-fi and the link to that is in the description as well. That's really all there is from me, so thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next time. Ta for now.